Welcome everyone to our DOGE Task Force. I appreciate those that are in attendance with us today. Committee-wise, I believe we may have a few that are joining us online. My co-chairs are here. We have Representative Tanner here in person, Representative Manwaring online, Representative Scott, who I believe will be joining us online eventually, along with Senator Bjerke. And we have Senator Blaylock and Senator Samaroff that are here. I don't have any additional opening comments. Co-Chair Ehlers, any additional opening comments? Okay, thank you. All right, committee will move on to our first item of business, the approval of the minutes for July 25th. Do I have a motion? Senator Samaroff, are you reaching for your light?
Mr. Chairman, for a motion.
Motion, Senators, in order. Go ahead.
I move that we approve the minutes from August 25th, 2025. July 25th, excuse me.
Motion from Senator Samaroff. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Okay. I'll give Representative Tanner a second. I think we do both sides on this one, so our rules. All right, we have a motion and a second to approve the minutes of July 25th. Any discussion on the motion? Hearing none, all in favor indicate by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? All right, motion carries. The minutes stand approved. So the first item is the presentation of performance evaluation overview reports and findings. Director Landgrell, welcome to our committee. Please state your name for the record and go ahead and proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. My name is Ryan Langrill, and I am the Director of the Idaho Legislature's Office of Performance Evaluations. I'm here to talk briefly about who we are and what we do, highlight some reports where there are some opportunities for legislative action or legislative attention, and then talk briefly about how our office can help this task force. So the Office of Performance Evaluations was created in 1994 to help the Idaho legislature oversee a growing and increasingly complex executive branch. Our office and the Governing Joint Legislative Oversight Committee enable the legislature to do deep dives and gather information and understanding of how state policies and programs work, and then to provide recommendations for improving those programs and ensuring that they run in line with legislative intent. The 4 projects that we're working on currently highlight the breadth of work that we do. Right now we are working on a report on the state's 911 emergency communications system, a report on the Idaho Home Learning Academy and virtual school policy, the state's workplace facility management, and on career technical education funding. So before I jump into opportunities for legislative action, I wanted to highlight a couple examples of the impact of our work. Starting with a report that was mentioned in the last meeting, our Idaho Transportation Department performance audit. So this report was released, and then after its release, the governor issued an executive order directing the Transportation Department to implement all 44 of our recommendations. And with that, the governor also installed new leadership at the department and required the department to issue annual accountability reports to ensure that they were following through implementing our recommendations. One example of the type of recommendations we made were on changing the way that the Transportation Department prioritized road maintenance. At the time, there was a very reactive, worst first approach to road maintenance. Whenever something would break down, that is when they would intervene and maintain the roads, which is an extremely expensive way to maintain roads. We recommended that they transition to a preventative life cycle cost minimization approach, and that required them to invest in some software to help them understand the condition of roads statewide. And between implementing that recommendation and other of our 44 recommendations, we estimated that the department saved about $30 million in one-time savings and $7 million annually. So those recommendations were implemented. The second topic I'd like to highlight on our impact is on child welfare reform. Over the last 10 years, we've released 5 reports highlighting highlighting issues both at the Department of Health and Welfare and in the child welfare system statewide. And while there had been some progress throughout the years, things really took off when Director Alex Adams took over last year. He made reforming the child welfare system his wildly important goal, and the roadmap that he used to reform that system came out of our 5 reports. And so that has been a pretty big push that he's made and really unstuck the department from their inability to move forward. So now I want to highlight several reports where there are open opportunities for legislative action and attention. And the first of these I wanted to highlight were sort of more genres of reports. And I've provided a handout that on the front sort of summarizes the reports in the high-risk areas, and then links on the back if you want to actually see the full reports, which are also available on our website, which you can access through the legislature's homepage. So the first genre of reports are on large-scale IT projects. We've done reports on the Idaho Student Information Management System and on a system called SchoolNet, which were both very expensive projects that, when implemented, failed to achieve their goals and were ultimately discontinued with little value returned to the state. So in response to that, we've developed checklists for agencies when they initiate new IT projects, and that's something that the legislature, I hope, can help hold agencies accountable for when they are doing these projects. We found similar problems on the K-12 Longitudinal Data System, or ICE, and on the Medicaid MMIS system, which was implemented, the previous one they implemented, which led to delays in Medicaid claims processing. And there we identified sort of similar challenges, but because these were necessary systems for the state to continue meeting its statutory requirements, terminating the systems were not an option. And so we targeted recommendations for improving system performance after deployment if they've failed to take those early steps. And finally, I wanted to highlight the report we released last year on LUMA, which reviewed the state controller's implementation of the new business information system, which was a system much larger in scope than those we had reviewed before. And so we reiterated several of our previous recommendations, but then also gave guidance for enterprise level projects, including a consideration of who should be governing LUMA. The second genre of reports I wanted to highlight involve Medicaid, particularly with the transition that the legislature initiated to move to comprehensive managed care. And so in the past, we've found that Medicaid has failed to be a good steward of its programs, particularly when contracting is involved. Although I want to emphasize this is before the current leadership were installed, but the risks are the same. The first report I want to highlight is on the design of the Idaho Behavioral Health Plan, which was the state's first major managed care contract. And we raised concerns about the scope of that managed care contract, which covered only outpatient behavioral health care, but it didn't cover close substitutes for outpatient behavioral health care like residential care. And we recommended that they take a serious look about the scope of managed care contracting to ensure that vendors have to make money by providing good care rather than by shifting costs to other payers in the system. We wrote a management letter when the Department of Health and Welfare contracted out its non-emergency medical transportation system. The contracting process for that was they provided insufficient information to vendors. And then once the contract was signed, they thought, now here we don't have to think about this ever again. And so when the vendor pulled out with 30 days notice, it was a nightmare. And so we provide additional lessons there for ensuring that health and welfare does not, that contracting does not absolve the department from responsibility for program oversight and success. And then we have a series of reports on Medicaid rate setting, hospital rate setting, and on the direct care workforce, which highlighted systemic weaknesses in Medicaid management. And we recommended stronger performance monitoring, aligning rate adjustments to demonstrated need, and then improving stewardship and oversight, especially in areas where Medicaid is creating a market rather than purchasing from an existing market. And so, you know, these are all reports that I could spend a good quarter of an hour talking about each of them, but if you want to go deeper, they're available on our website. Next, I wanted to highlight one area where sort of there's a specific failure due to the diffusion of responsibility, particularly across the Department of Health and Welfare. And we highlighted this again in a report we released in May on children's residential care. And that is that essentially Idaho does not have a process for holding paid caregivers accountable in residential care settings. We built a system based off of the nursing home, the way that about 30 years ago, everyone in residential care was in a nursing home, and we had a system to hold workers accountable if they abused, neglected, or exploited people in nursing homes. And as we've moved away from that, we've also, we have not expanded that accountability process to children's residential care facilities, intermediate care facilities for people with intellectual disabilities, or assisted living facilities. And so we've heard consistently across those areas that there can be sort of serial offenders hopping from facility to facility without any way for the state to hold them accountable. Next, I'd like to highlight a report we released in 2013 on strengthening contract management in Idaho. The legislature and the Division of Purchasing did make several changes in response to this report, but there's sort of two outstanding recommendations that the legislature may wish to consider. In the Procurement Act, several agencies are exempt from the requirements of the Procurement Act. So this would include constitutional officers, the judicial branch, and universities. And we recommended that the legislature require agencies that are exempt, nevertheless, to incorporate certain best practices in policy regarding the decision to contract, performance requirements in the contract, the request for proposal and award process, and then contract and monitoring provisions. And we reiterated this recommendation after the LUMA report, as that was a high-risk, high-dollar contract that fell outside the requirements of the Procurement Act, but nevertheless had statewide implications. And that second recommendation that we have out of that report is that we recommended that these high-dollar, high-risk contracts from these exempt agencies nevertheless be subject to some level of statewide monitoring. And now the last report I wanted to mention was a report we released in 2021 on reviewing state tax preferences. Now this committee has shown a lot of interest in continually appropriated funds and the lack of oversight that JFAC has in those situations. And many tax preferences look pretty similar, where the legislature has dedicated revenue to a specific policy goal, but then because it doesn't fall under the standard appropriations process, there's no systematic process of revisiting the performance of those. And so we created a sort of a choose your own adventure process, and I included the one-page highlights in the packet I handed out. And there, like the big takeaway there is that you don't want to put that any sort of review has to be driven by legislative interest. If you put it in the hands of analysts, they'll give you something that they find interesting, but is perhaps very expensive and analytical, but not actually meeting the legislature's needs. So this really needs to be a legislatively driven process if the legislature has interest in implementing it. Now, finally, how can we help this task force? We can just, any questions you have, please ask them. We can look at our backlog of previous reports. We have a lot of subject matter expertise in the office. We would, and we will try to answer any questions based on our previous reports. Any research we can do sort of within a week's time, we can just try to answer the question that you ask us. And then, but if you ask us something that's of a pretty large scope, then I can help you develop a study request that can go to the Joint Legislative Oversight Committee for consideration for a full evaluation report. And I go into detail in the little pamphlet I handed out into how to do that, but if this committee had any questions about agency consolidation or deconsolidation, we could give you the trade-offs that exist in a particular agency. And with that, that is my presentation. So if you have any questions, I'm happy to stand for those. Otherwise, please, we are always available. We're just down the street. And we're happy to help in any way we can.
Thank you, Director Lang. We'll appreciate that presentation. You mentioned a couple of those reports, those last couple you mentioned that had things that had yet to be implemented. Mm-hmm. Were there things in any of those other reports, particularly in the last 5 years, that are substantial opportunities for efficiency or cost savings that have not yet been implemented?
Mr. Chair, so there's a lot of the recommendations sort of required a bit more context. We had recommended that we did a report on management of correctional facility capacity and found that the most cost-effective means of moving forward was to build a new prison, given the costs of keeping people out of state and in county jails. So that required a lot more context that I could have. We had recommendations for the Department of Corrections as well on really systematically evaluating their programs for treatment, but a lot of these are, but those are the ones where the ones I mentioned were the ones where I think there's the greatest opportunity for cost savings and improved effectiveness from legislative action.
Thank you, Director. Okay. Representative Tanner.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director Langrill, you had actually spoke early on about ITD and the report that you guys actually were able to accomplish and how the cost savings aspect. Is there a way that we can actually, since we give money to ACHD, is there a way for us to actually do the same type of audit type report on there from a cost savings aspect, or are they kind of outside our purview as legislature?
Representative, I don't know if we're getting a little feedback from that mic. Maybe
Do I need to go a little closer?
or switch mics. Is the other mic working?
Does this one work better?
That's better. I don't hear any.
You want me to repeat it?
I think we heard. It was just
Okay.
a little weird feedback. So, Director Langro, go ahead.
Yes, Mr. Chair, Representative Tanner. At least under the authority of our office, any entity created by the legislature or that the legislature is authorized to collect taxes, we can review. And so that includes local governments, and it would include, ACHD would be under our jurisdiction.
Okay, follow up.
Follow up. Go ahead.
Thank you, and I'll leave this with two separate things in there, so I'll give you a chance to answer both. But you had mentioned health and welfare and the mismanagement that actually went on within that department for years. And then you also mentioned that there, with the change of leadership within health and welfare, you've seen positive change. Obviously, all of us in the legislature have seen positive change with the new leadership takeover. But the current leadership, at least the current director, is leaving us, unfortunately, and we have a new director. So how do we make sure that that mismanagement doesn't actually fall back and happen again? How does the legislature actually keep control over that to make sure that those don't happen? Because what I had seen is that we, even as a legislature, directed them to do certain things, and they still didn't listen to us. So how do we pull them a little bit stronger? So that's one. The other one, you mentioned just agency consolidations. You guys were happy to do some reports on that. Just curious if you kind of already have some ideas on what if it's DOPL, if it's certain groups within DOPL we need to consolidate, or if it's agencies as a whole. There is a lot, as I've gone through all the agencies, and especially sitting on JFAC, there's a lot of separate agencies that do very, very similar things that I think we are double spending on. So do you guys already know of some of those ones that you guys have done such a deep dive into this that you could recommend to this committee?
Director Langro.
Mr. Chair and Representative Tanner, so the first question on how do we continue to hold the department accountable with new leadership, I guess best answer I can come up with that is, we've published sort of like examples of how the department should be contracting, how the department should be monitoring their performance and soliciting feedback, and just making sure that they're doing that they're being transparent about what they're doing. We've made recommendations in the past about using legislative intent language in appropriations, but that's sort of our sticking point, or that's a tricky part for us is, now we know what they should do, how do we make them do it? So that's what I can think of it at that point. I mean, you can always send us in and we can review what's happening in any given agency or in any program at any given time, but that's kind of hard to do systematically. And then the second question on, I'm sorry, could you?
Representative Tanner, you want to repeat the question?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. The other one was just on the agency consolidation.
Yes.
Go ahead.
Sorry, Mr. Chair and Representative Tanner. I'm wary of opining too much without having done the work of what to do. There's a lot at the department where there's pieces we've thought could be either moved to other agencies or consolidated, but I don't have anything off the top of my head, and I worry that if I have anything that turns out, water resources and DEQ do very different things, maybe. But I haven't looked into that enough. So.
We won't hold you to that, Director, but appreciate that. We may have some more follow-up there for you as well. Any other questions? Senator Blaylock.
Thank you, Chairman. Director, mine might be a little bit more about what you found in some of these reports, and so I might just need to go and do a deep dive. But I'm curious, when you talked about Luma, you had mentioned the procurement process and that had they been required to follow our procurement process, that maybe that would have changed some of the outcomes. So in your opinion, is some of the issues that maybe we've seen with Luma, is it from the provider, or do you think it is rooted from the procurement process not being followed?
Director Langro.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair, Senator Blaylock. So in Luma, we thought, and it's hard to tell how much is what the state procured and decided to hold accountable of the provider versus deficiencies of the provider. And the way that we look at things is like it's ultimately up to the state agency to do a good job procuring and managing contracts. And there were things that they did where they did not actually fulfill their responsibility. And so we do think I can tell you across states, ERP systems are nightmares always. But we do think there were ways it could have gone better if the Procurement Act if there were changes they had made in how they procured the system.
Follow-up, Senator? Go
Yeah,
ahead.
one more question. You had talked about Medicaid and specifically with the behavioral health when we had given that to an MCO. I'm curious what your thoughts are, just having done a deep dive into that aspect of managed care and how it's operating there with behavioral health, what your view was of the bill that was just passed this last session, moving all Medicaid to an MCO model. Yeah, I'm just curious what your take is, if that was a good move or not.
Director Langro.
Mr. Chair and Senator Blaylock, I think there are trade-offs that in either direction, and that moving to managed care carries pretty big risks, especially in contract management and oversight. We haven't seen the department do a good job with that in the past, but they've learned a lot. And our hope is that with that, with the knowledge of their the previous things they've done wrong, that moving forward they'll be able to do a better job. I don't have an opinion on the bill one way or the other, but I think there were some trade-offs that both, staying with the status quo was not a low-risk proposition either. So that's all I'll say.
Follow-up.
Senator, go ahead.
Maybe a better question is, with the reporting that you did back to the department, were those changes implemented?
Director Langro.
Mr. Chair and Senator Blaylock, yes. So they have internalized our recommendations. When they rebid the Idaho Behavioral Health Plan, they took our recommendations into consideration and have really strengthened their contract monitoring team. So they've done some good work.
Thank you, Senator. Okay, I don't see any other questions. Director Langro, thank you so much for taking time with us today. And as you offered, and as I said, we may have some more follow-up for you.
Please do. Look forward to it.
Thank you. Okay, next we have the Division of Occupational Licensing. I understand Director Barron may be out, but we have Ryan Bernard with us. Mr. Bernard, welcome. Please come forward, state your name for the record, and go ahead and proceed. I think at the bottom, Mr. Bernard, there you go. Button up there, perfect.
Chairman, members of the committee, my name is Ryan Bernard. I'm the Legislative and Regulatory Affairs Chief for the Division of Occupational and Professional Licensing. As you mentioned earlier, Administrator Barron wishes he was here to be able to present to you guys today, but unfortunately his wife is having surgery, so he's unable to make it. I'll go ahead and start with just a brief overview of DOPL. DOPL is codified through House Bill 318 in 2020, and then Executive Order 2020-10 reorganized 11 agencies into one division. From there, we've organized it into four separate bureaus: health professions, occupational licensing, building construction and real estate, and then our administrative bureau. The EO also directed the administrator to coordinate a move into one central location. Our main location is located at the Chinden campus on the first floor of Building 4, with satellite offices in Coeur d'Alene and Blackfoot. In 2021, during the 2021 legislative session, the restructuring of the 11 agencies into 48 boards and commissions into DOPL was codified through 3 separate bills. Senate Bill 1024 empowered the division's hiring authority to the administrator. Senate Bill 1026 changed the statute references of previous self-governing agencies into the new name of the Division of Occupational and Professional Licensing. And then Senate Bill 1056 detailed the duties of the division administrator and transitioned all boards and commissions to the Occupational Licensing Fund. DOPL's current goals are to increase efficiency, improve the renewal process, and improve the cash balances of all boards. Over the last year, we've transitioned all licensing and permitting into one automated system. That system's called OASIS. This has increased efficiency and improved our customer satisfaction. Before OASIS, there's 11 separate operating systems at the division from the 11 previously existing agencies. And this has enhanced our ability to provide same-day licensure for applicants, as well as an expedited process for military members and their spouses. From there, I'll kind of go into the licensing and the boards part of the division. DOPL currently serves 44 boards, 3 safety programs, and 8 advisory committees. There are 286 different licenses you can receive, licenses, registrations, and certificates you can receive from DOPL. One of the packets I provided for you guys lists every single license you can receive from the division. As of fiscal year 2025, there are 257,969 licensees, registrants, and certificates held in the state. The performance evaluation report, which I've also provided for you guys, goes into detail how many licenses each board has and the amount of disciplinary cases each board has reviewed over the past few years. The report provided is the 2024 report. That is the most up-to-date one we have right now. Our 2025 report won't be completed until August 29th, so just in a few days from now. Since DOPL has existed, there's only been one new board created, and that's the Naturopathic Healthcare Board. The only new licenses that have been created since DOPL has come into existence are the licensed naturopathic doctor, a registered naturopath, and a mental telehealth certification. Going into board consolidation, since DOPL has existed, there's been 4 board consolidations, all that have been done through executive agency legislation. The first one being done was merging landscape architects with architects in 2022. Then in 2024, we performed 2 consolidations, one being merging the Board of Midwives with the Board of Nursery, and then the creation of the Allied Health Advisory Board. This merged athletic trainers, respiratory therapists, dietitians, and naturopathic medical doctors into one advisory committee under the Board of Medicine. And then most recently, we merged the Nursing Home Administrators Board with the Residential Care Facility Administrators Board into the Long-Term Care Board, and that was done this past legislative session. Going forward, there's 2 executive agency legislations that we plan to run this year that also will capture merging boards. One is merging the Board of Denturity with and making them under the Board of Dentistry. This solves a negative cash balance that a negative cash balance issue that the denturists currently have. And another merger we plan on going through is merging the Board of Podiatrists, or making the Board of Podiatrists a member on the Board of Medicine, so that would get rid of the Podiatry Board. Also solves a negative cash balance issue. However, going forward, given the governor's executive order targeting the increased efficiencies across state government, we've additionally been going through a comprehensive review of all boards and commissions in terms of both consolidation and delicensure as a whole. We look forward to working with this committee when it comes to board consolidation and delicensures that this committee chooses to look forward to. And then when it comes to going over cash balances, I'm going to pass the baton to Katie Stewart, who is our Administrative Bureau Chief.
Thank you, Mr. Bernard. Ms. Stewart, welcome. Please state your name for the record and go ahead and proceed.
Perfect. Chairman, members of the committee, thank you so much for the opportunity. My name is Katie Stewart. I'm the Bureau Chief for the Administration Bureau at the Division of Occupational and Professional Licenses. In regards to cash balances, in the 2023 legislative session, JFAC added intent language to our budget bill outlining that they would like to see our boards come within 125 and 30% of their 5-year operating expenditure, and asked that year on December 1st that we submit a report to all committee chairs and JFAC explaining where our boards were at and what our plan was moving forward. We submitted that report in 2023, and then again in 2024, we submitted a similar report as to where we were and the work that we've done. In legislative session 2025, we actually took that intent language and put it into the division statute, stating that we agree it's extremely important to the division, and rather than wait for intent language to be given to us, that we would put it in our own division statute as something that we would continue to work on. In FY24, we ended our cash balance with $63,179,000. In FY25, we ended our cash balance with $63,507,000. That's an increase of $327,803. The increase from FY23 to FY24 was $7.9 million. This year significantly less because we paid out $6 million for Oasis, which is our licensing software. In fee changes during FY25, we decreased 13 licensing boards. So boards that were over 125% of their 5-year operating expenditure received a decrease in their annual fees. Additionally, we're bringing fee increases for 7 boards that have cash balances below 30% of their 5-year operating expenditures in this upcoming legislative session. We will be providing our annual report to all committee chairs and JFAC on December 1st for the FY25. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I'd be happy to stand for any questions you have.
Thank you, Ms. Stewart. Mr. Bernard, Representative Tanner.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm not sure if you or Ryan would happy to answer these questions, but DOPL has more than a dozen chapters within rules that are 1 to 2 pages. I know in the past you and Ryan had mentioned that they use the executive agency legislative system to implement moving some of those away from the rules process and more into the legislative process into statute. Is this something that you guys are looking at doing with currently, or do you guys have plans to do?
Ms. Stewart or Mr. Bernard?
Chairman, Representative Tanner, I guess as we go through this comprehensive review, that's definitely something we're looking forward to move language or rules to statute, so yes.
Follow-up, Representative, go ahead.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I just want to clarify, so yes, you are currently looking at them, and then how many are you guys actually looking at? Because what I found is there's a ton of them that are just like really, really short ones. So, and then the other thing that the recently Idaho had the HUD Secretary, Scott Turner, that came to Idaho. One of the things he was pushing on was home prices, the cost of building in general. And he talked about rolling back a lot of the building code that is put in place through past administrations. A lot of it was done under Obama or Biden administration that really hindered the cost and really put us in a really bad financial spot. I mean, not just here in Idaho, but across the country. Are we planning to take and revise all those to more of the Trump administration, kind of what they're looking at, or have you guys even looked at that so far?
Mr. Bernard?
Chairman, Representative Tanner, for your first part of your question, given the governor's executive order, we are looking through a comprehensive review of all legislation going forward. So I can give you an exact number on how many boards necessarily we've evaluated their rules and what ones we want to eventually push to go into statute, but that is something we've been looking at. Do you have a better answer to that?
Ms. Stewart?
Chairman, Representative Tanner, I do know that the Building Code Board is going through negotiated rulemaking right now. I don't know the specifics. I'm happy to reach out to the executive officer and the bureau chief over that bureau to get you a full overview of what they're looking at, but I do know that they are going through negotiated rulemaking.
Another question, Representative?
One last one, thank you. Just on the first two that you guys had mentioned, if you could provide this body with what you guys are looking at from the executive legislative system for implementing those, which ones you're actually looking at, if you could actually get them to this body, it'd be great, as well as if you could have your board, I guess, reach out on the building code aspect and let this body know kind of what you guys are looking at cutting back. How is that going to meet with the Trump administration's plans? The last question I have is, which boards do you feel are the lowest hanging fruit? There's a lot of boards that are in there that almost add dual processes in it. They're very, very similar. So one of the things that we had looked at was trying to get rid of some of these boards. Consolidation would be ideal, or if there's some that we just got rid of. So if you guys had ideas on some of the low-hanging fruit ones that we can actually consolidate or remove altogether, would be great.
Ms. Stewart?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, Representative Tanner. As Ryan stated, we do have two that we are bringing this legislative session, dentistry into dentistry, podiatry into medicine, and we'd happy to sidebar with you on any other ideas that we might have.
Kind of on those same lines, Ms. Stewart or Mr. Bernard, Representative Tanner also mentioned boards that whether we really continue to need those boards or if they were really health safety oriented from the beginning. So I think some thought on your part and ours as well on which boards and licensure really isn't needed. We do have a kind of a dual process board with the occupational licensing reform folks that I also serve on, but if we can attack the issue from two sides, great. So just hope you guys could give some thought and work to that as well.
Perfect.
Any other co-chair Ehlers, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Stewart, for the cash balances, you mentioned for those that are negative, doing a fee increase, and others might lower the fees. Last year, we gave them an opportunity, I think through legislation, to do a fee holiday. Has any of those taken advantage of a fee holiday or considered a fee holiday?
Ms. Stewart.
Mr. Chairman, Co-Chair Ehlers, that is a great question and something that we're working on and plan to have implemented them by January 1st. We're working with those boards actively to be very thoughtful about the process because the way the statute is written is it's for renewals only. So we need to be very thoughtful about how we do that and when is their renewal cycle and what does that look like.
Follow up, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. For either one of you, I think Mr. Bernard mentioned that we just had the fiscal year 24 report and the fiscal 25 is coming soon. So just a request, could you get that to the task force as soon as that's available so we could have that? Thank you.
Thank you, co-chair. Any other questions? Okay, I don't see any. Mr. Bernard, Ms. Stewart, thank you so much for the information and the
Thank you so
presentation.
much.
Okay, next, we have Mr. Bybee. Welcome, Keith, and look forward to hearing about the FTP and personnel cost variance reports. Mr. Bybee, you know the drill. Please state your name for the record and go ahead and proceed.
Good morning, Chairman Lakey, Co-Chair Ehlers, and members of the task force. My name is Keith Bybee. I am the Division Manager of the Budget and Policy Analysis Division for Legislative Services Office. The several JFAC members, Representative Tanner, Representative Manwaring, and Senator Bierke on this committee will be a little bit familiar with this report. But I think it's important to kind of bring forward some of the ideas built in here. The reason that you're seeing a report that isn't just a count of the positions that are vacant currently is that a couple of years ago, my team and we put together this idea of how to measure the workforce, not necessarily measure when a position was vacant. And so throughout this presentation, I'm going to give a little bit of background about how our personnel system currently works, why vacant positions may not be the best tool for gauging what your agency workforce looks like, and then spend a little bit more time talking about the actual appropriated dollars spent for personnel costs. So the appropriation for personnel costs that are actually spent on personnel costs as to kind of a different way of thinking about what the agency workforce looks like and how filled up the agency needs to do its jobs out there. So, all right, by way of background, let's talk a little bit about the report, and I need to do some level setting about the differences between a position and a full-time equivalent position. Now, I think everybody understands right away that a position is a job, and that specific job on how it is engaged in the payroll process is different than what the legislature uses, which is the full-time equivalent position, as a way to measure the workforce. And so when you're talking about a vacant position, you could see situations where you have several employees job sharing, or you only need or authorize 3/4 of a position to carry out the duties that are required for that job. But a full-time equivalent position, on the other hand, is a measurement of the number of hours worked over the course of a fiscal year, which is 2,080 hours is a full-time work over that time period. So naturally, there's going to be positions, if you think of the state government as a whole, there's going to be positions that come on and off the workforce as people transition into different jobs. They may retire, they may lose their job, they may take something else on in their lives. And so there's going to be some positions that come on and off the system, but the idea here is that we are measuring the workforce through the FTP cap. And so if we look at this report in the first 4 columns of the report, I'm going to focus on specifically on that top row to give everybody an idea and understanding of what we're talking about here. So that top row is the Office of the Attorney General. Now you can see on that top row, the recently reported vacancies were 12, and that was as of a specific date. So as of the payroll date, August 1st, 2024. Now that tells you something specific in time about they may have lost a few attorneys or deputy attorney generals that came off the system, but it doesn't tell you much about the work that's actually being done. And so this is where we get into the meat of the report that we put together. And what we have done here is we have created a crosswalk between the number of positions on the payroll system to the full-time equivalent positions that the legislature uses as its measurement stick for the workforce. And the additional thing that we did here is we took a more holistic view. Rather than a point in time, we measured it over a 5-year period. And so in that third column where you see average authorized FTP from 2020 to 2024, you're seeing the average full-time equivalent position cap that was 221.42 equivalent positions. So almost 221 and a half positions is the other way to think about that. And just for evidence right now, the Attorney General has a current FTP cap of 227. Over that time, what we measured was every payroll, all 26 payrolls over that 5 fiscal years to come up with an average filled full-time equivalent positions. And so this is really a look at what their workforce looks like. So they're just shy of 94%, which is about 208 filled FTP over that time period. And so the way to think about this is really that what is their workforce, what is the necessary needs of that agency, and what are the changes necessary or that happened over the course of that 5 years that may necessitate a reduction in the number of full-time equivalent positions that are on the system at the time. I mentioned before that their current FTP cap is 227, and so that's going to push their average up and increase their vacant FTP at the time of this report, right? And so the idea behind this report really is to just talk about a way to get at the information and not necessarily a naming and shaming exercise, right? So the idea here is to give JFAC and even this task force the ability to ask questions of the agencies when you're coming through. Well, why isn't your workforce currently staffed at the way that the legislature sees it? You know, at the Division of Veteran Services, for instance, they have personnel costs that are authorized to hire nurses, but they cannot, as Representative Tanner knows, they cannot hire those nurses or have a hard time hiring all the nurses all at once, and so they go out and contract for nursing. And so the idea here is to really give a little bit of an understanding of what this workforce looks like from the state perspective. Now, the second part of this report that I haven't talked about over on the right-hand side really has to do with the dollars. The dollars spent on personnel costs versus how much they actually spent on personnel. So again, we need to do a little bit of level setting here and talk about some of the systematic moves within the system. So You may have noticed in the appropriations bills that when JFAC writes those, they set the budget according to specific expenditure categories or expenditure account categories, and that would be personnel costs, operating expenditure, capital outlay, and trustee and benefit payments. Personnel costs, I think you can understand, those are for salary and benefits for the state employee or state workforce. Operating expenditures could be anything from contracts to purchase of fuel for when they're moving vehicles around the state, to regular everyday office supplies. That's what you would find in that general account category of operating expenditures. Capital outlay, I'm going to reference my notes here. These are going to include all expenses for land, highways, buildings, fixtures, and fixed equipment and structures. So those are kind of those big depreciable assets that you would think about in capital outlay. And that also includes lease payments for rent under that category. And finally, for trustee and benefit payments, what you're talking about there are effectively pass-through. When we pay for, we talked earlier about Medicaid services, when we pay providers, that comes through trustee and benefit payments. That's where that account category is lodged. Now, I'm giving you some background on this and really spending some time on JFAC items here because it's important. When we look at the statute of 67, section 673511 Idaho Code, specifically the legislature has given the executive branch the ability, some flexibility between expenditure categories. And when the budget is loaded in personnel costs, you see the most flexibility for state agencies. What that means practically is that if an agency has excess dollars in personnel costs and they want to, the example I gave you before, like for the Division of Veteran Services, where they can't find enough nurses to help staff the state hospitals, they can transfer those appropriated amounts down into operating expenditures in order to contract with state nurses, or excuse me, contract with nurses from outside sources. There are specific guidelines in Idaho Code in that same section that allow that don't allow the transfer from any other object or expenditure account category into personnel costs. And this is really important because your predecessors set up an area that doesn't allow for just the random growth of government in personnel. That is kind of the key measurement of how large your workforce is and helps to constrain the size of government, right? And so you can't move money from trustee and benefit payments to bring people on staff if you would like to hire more people. That is through the process, the incremental process that comes through JFAC if you need to increase your staff size and take on additional work for any purpose. And so there are constraints around how the legislature has set the appropriation in the past. Going back in history, some of the reason why the legislature has given some additional flexibility from that is older appropriations bills before the Consolidated Budget Act of 1945. You would see an appropriation written specifically for legislative services to hire Keith Bybee at a salary of $100,000 a year, right? And so if I were to have left my position, the agency wouldn't be able to use that money for anything else other than salary and benefits for Keith Bybee. And so you can see how that's not really a workable situation for a growing, complex unit of government that the legislature has created over the years. And so that template has sort of evolved over time and allowed for personnel costs to be used generally for the hiring and firing and retaining of state employees, right? But it's not for a specific employee. So that's where some of that flexibility comes from. So the background here is that when we talk about vacant positions, there is at least a tacit agreement that somehow those vacant positions or those vacant salaries are being used for something different or maybe inappropriate. And in some cases that might or might not be true. But what we never had before this report came forward is an ability on how to measure what that actually looks like. Rather than a point in time, now we have a kind of longitudinal approach to how personnel costs are being spent. And personnel costs are the real control on your size of the workforce, by the way. The language in the appropriations bill that measures the workforce, that full-time equivalent cap position language that you find in the appropriations bills, the governor has the ability to increase the FTP cap with notification of JFAC, and you can read that right in the bill. And so it's really the personnel dollars that are the control on how large the agency is, what size, and how those dollars can be used. And so when we look at the remaining 4 columns on the edge of the page here, what you would see is the average personnel cost appropriation for the Attorney General over that period was $25.2 million. And they do a pretty good job of spending their personnel dollars on personnel. About 95, almost 96% of their total personnel appropriation is spent on personnel. I've added some additional columns off to the right there, and that is highlighting the general fund source. And in that case, you see 97% of the general fund personnel cost appropriation is spent on personnel. And so, again, this report is not meant to be a naming and shaming report. It's mostly to give you all understanding of how the agency is currently using their budget and what percentage of the positions of the workforce established are actually filled at it, over that 5-year period, to really give an ongoing average of how that looks over time. The final remarks that I would make about that column on average personnel appropriation compared to the general fund, where the total appropriation. So the dedicated fund sources and the federal fund sources may not be as aligned as what the general fund source are. And what I mean by aligned is you're seeing appropriation to expenditure or actual to budget comparison there. Sometimes you have a state agency with a dedicated fund source that has a personnel cost appropriation that does not have sufficient cash to back up that appropriation. Now, JFAC has done a lot of good work to right-size that over time, but there's still plenty of effort that needs to occur. Similarly for federal funds, if there's for agencies that do have federal grants that are coming on and off the system, the appropriation is set at a pretty high level, and depending upon the work that the agency is doing, they may or may not require those additional personnel dollars in federal. And so that's why there's a little bit more of a delta between average spent on personnel for the total personnel costs versus general fund. Most agencies that have a general fund appropriation do tend to spend most of their general fund appropriation over there. So that's the basics of the report. I went pretty quickly, so I'm happy to answer any questions and get you going through this little report.
Thank you, Mr. Bybee. Maybe I'll start with a couple of questions. So looking, well, I maybe start with a kind of a repeat of what you said. Our goal here is to make sure that we're not providing too many positions and that funds are used for the things that they're supposed to be used for appropriately. And those 2 columns, the average of FTP filled and then the average spent on personnel. Those are interesting percentages, no naming and shaming going on, but as far as the average of FTP filled, what's a good bar? Do we have a good idea? I mean, above 95, 90% seems good to me, but you get down in lieutenant governor with only 3 positions in the 60s, that's okay. I can understand there's such a small number there, but what are your thoughts on an appropriate measuring stick there?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chairman. So, and your insights are really good, actually. Your instincts on that one are great, is that it's going to depend on the agency size. So for an agency that has, 200 established positions, 95% of those positions being filled is probably a pretty good gauge. When you're talking about an agency that is under 10, then you you would assume that they would try and fill those positions as quickly as they could, mostly because the work isn't able to get done. One of the agencies under the Department of Revenue and Taxation, which would be the Board of Tax Appeals, they have 5 full-time equivalent positions, and if they don't fill those positions immediately, if they have some churn within the agency, there's just work not getting done. They're not able to meet their goals and their metrics and their timelines for getting the work done. So size of the agency, complexity of the agency is going to make a difference under that case. And ideally, you would see similar percentages for filled positions and dollars spent on personnel across the board. And that's pretty uniform as what you're looking across there. There are some differences, and those differences, I think JFAC spent some time trying to understand what that means. But
So kind of for both columns, very rough initial rule of thumb is 95%, assuming it's not a little teeny agency. The state kind of, is that correct from your perspective?
Mr. Chairman, I think that is a pretty good rule of thumb. Yep.
Okay. And then among these numbers, are those the two things, or are there other ways to, are there other ways to best approach that analysis of, do they have the right number of positions, and are they spending their money appropriately? Or are these kind of the right metrics?
Mr. Chairman, I think these are the right metrics, actually. I think that as we've gotten more into reviewing base budgets in JFAC and really trying to understand the needs of the agency in order to carry out the mission assigned to them by state government, I think that really understanding what their workforce is and understanding how they spend their personnel dollars is a good understanding. So again, back to my example with the Division of Veterans Services, are there things that the state could be doing to be offering more competitive wages to hire nurses on as a full-time basis? And is that something the state is willing to do? Or should we take a different approach and give up the ghost on it and just say that we're just going to appropriate all those dollars in operating and expect that you go hire contractors to carry out that mission? So those are really key takeaways from my perspective on this.
Thank you, Mr. Bybee. That, just a comment on that. I know there's a balance there, but it does seem to be more transparent from my perspective. If you're truly not going to be able to use positions and have to use contracts, trying to parcel those two out more accurately as far as what you're actually spending your money on makes more sense to me. Other questions? Co-Chair Ehlers.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Bybee, I want to make sure I'm understanding one of these columns, the third from the right, the average percent spent on personnel for the 5 years. So is the remainder, so just for math's sake, Attorney General has 25 million appropriated, 95% were spent. So the actual was about 24 million spent. So that remainder 1 million, is that just from unspent, or does that include transfers to other line items?
Mr. Bybee.
Mr. Chairman and Co-Chair Ehlers, that's a really good point. It could be both. So it could be unspent appropriation, or it could be they moved money from personnel costs down into operating or capital outlay if they needed to replace a vehicle or something like that. So that's where I brought in that idea of flexibility between the expenditure account categories.
Okay, follow up on that?
Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Mr. Bybee. You've probably spent more time looking and compiling this data. Is it worth parsing out, do you think, to see how much of that was transfers versus just remained unspent?
Mr. Bybee.
Mr. Chairman and Representative Ehlers, we can get back to you on that one for sure. We have reports built that we run, and through iterations of JFAC, we've spent time talking about where that remaining delta was spent versus just reverted. And reverted, I mean, is just unspent appropriation. And that could be from over appropriation, they didn't have cash to back it up, or they couldn't find people to hire.
Follow up?
Another question on this. So the governor recently issued an executive order around FTPs asking that Agencies submit a report of full-time positions that are vacant in accordance with the Budget Development Manual and reduce those positions that have been vacant for over 6 months. Now, maybe you have to wait to answer this question until those budget submissions are entered and we have those. But how would that compare, this sort of 6-month vacancies versus what we have here, which is more of a longer 5-year average, which I understand, right? It's not just a snapshot. Oh, there's one vacancy, but maybe it was filled the next month. This is kind of truly showing us what's sort of perpetually vacant and maybe subject for elimination. So how would you say those numbers would compare? Mr. Biden.
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chairman and Representative Ayler. So there's a couple ways to think about that. So back in the Great Recession, so the 2009 to 2011 timeframe, then Governor Butch Otter at the time issued an executive order to clean up positions on the state EIS system. But these are not the same thing as cleaning up the FTP cap in the legislative budget system and the appropriations that we sent out. Like you said, I'm waiting for some additional details, but I'm expecting it more to be on the cleanup of positions on the system that have been vacant for 6 months rather than a wholesale reduction in FTP requests from the agencies on that one. So I think that remains to be seen, but that's something that I think the legislature needs to spend some time thinking about, looking at in conjunction with this report. So it's not just established positions in the payroll system, right? This would be measurement of the workforce. Is the workforce the right size? Should this workforce be right-sized additionally? Are we just getting rid of positions that aren't being filled or have no intent to be filled if they've been vacant for longer than 6 months?
Senator Summerhoff.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Bybee, just to follow up to the last 2 questions that have been asked, if we're looking at making decisions like determining measuring sticks or even potentially eliminating some of these positions, it appears there could be another layer of data that could tell more of this story. So for example, when I look at the Department of Labor and when I see the percent of average FTP filled at about 73%, I first wonder, have there been a lot of leadership vacancies or transitions within that organization that have prevented hiring? I also wonder how those positions, is that a group of positions within a certain area, and how do those public service salaries compare to the private market? So before making a decision based on this data, and while we're looking at it over time, which is helpful, I still need another layer of context to help tell that story. So what are your thoughts on being able to provide more data?
Mr. Bybee.
Mr. Chairman and Senator Summerhoff, thank you for that question. That is going to be a tough one to answer. So let me start with the market data as of last year's CEC report. I think if memory serves, now I'll get back with the actual numbers on this one, so I'll make sure I follow that up. But it's my memory on that topic that on average, state employee total compensation lagged behind market by a total of about 14%. Now that's a combination of salary, health insurance benefits, and retirement. On the salary measurement, we're a little bit more behind market, but we make up, the state government offers a more competitive benefit package than what you would see in the private market with retirement and health insurance. And so that's why you end up in that total compensation number around 14% is my memory on that one. But that's going to differ position by position, when you're talking about how those are marked compared to the market. So I'll follow up with you directly. Now, speaking of Department of Labor, and Representative Tanner really did spend a lot of time on this budget during this past legislative session. So, and there's a little bit of history here, and I was the budget analyst for the Department of Labor during this time period, so I kind of know where some of the details live. So, Prior to 2015, most of the Department of Labor's operations lived within they were authorized a continuous appropriation. So when the legislature would write an appropriation bill for the Department of Labor, it was only for a small program like the wage and hour program. Now, when Department of Labor was brought on budget in 2015, there was an active decision by the legislature then and the bill sponsors to provide some additional cushion to the Department of Labor specifically. Now, some more background on Department of Labor. They receive most of their funding from the U.S. Department of Labor to carry out those missions of whether you're talking about writing statistics on unemployment insurance data or carrying out the unemployment insurance paying for those benefits, right? And so their funding increases when economic times are bad. And their funding decreases when economic times are good, right? And so they have a large delta between the authorized full-time equivalent positions and personnel spent on personnel because they don't have cash to support those people. There's not enough grants coming through the door to employ all those people. And if you think about it, there's not as much work to be done when times have been as good as they have for as long as they have in this state. You know, with an unemployment rate of about 3.4%, and that's hung on there since 2013 at about that, even lower at some points. So there was an active decision by that legislature to provide some cushion within the Department of Labor's budget so that if we did get into times of trouble, they wouldn't have to call a special session just to write an additional appropriation to the Department of Labor to make sure that they were able to staff up and meet the needs during some kind of change in the economy that they would really have to ramp up.
Thanks, Senator. Senator Blaylock.
I had a question. I think I understand now the difference between what is appropriated and the percent spent, and then this next column is talking about the general funds and how much of the general funds was spent, correct? Okay. Can you, I know we had talked about it a little bit, but the agencies that are able to move funds into operations to help pay for agency staff or whatever, what checksums are in place now to see how those funds that were rolled from what was appropriated and it rolled into their operations, how it was spent?
Mr. Bybee.
Mr. Chairman and Senator Blaylock, I think I understand your question to mean what oversight does the legislature provide to make sure that they're spending personnel dollars on personnel? And so that has been part of the JFAC process in their DNA for probably the last 10 years, as they're really looking at how closely aligned their expenditures are to the budget as set by the legislature, and really coming away with some understanding about, you know, how well they can meet the needs of their workforce through their personnel cost appropriation. And that's some of the hearings that we hear every day in JFAC about whether they need an additional position to carry out this mission or whether they have excess personnel and they're just using it for hiring contractors, so to speak. So that's the oversight function that JFAC plays.
Follow-up, Senator, go ahead.
Okay. I'm not on JFAC, so maybe that's why that seems a little, yeah, interesting. I do have one more question. The Idaho Public Television, it looks like their 5-year average, the percentage is over what was allocated. They're at 168%. Can you just walk me through that line item?
Mr. Bybee.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Blaylock, thank you for that question too. So like all these numbers, there's a story behind them. 2 or 3 years ago, I'm looking at my colleague here, the fundraising arm of the Idaho Public Television, most commonly known as the Friends of Idaho Public Television, that appropriation was moved under a continuous appropriation. So that was moved off budget. And so what you see is we used to account for all of their staff between general fund and the Friends of Public Television. But this average incorporates that shift. And so we reduced JFAC, when JFAC reduced that budget to account for those positions being managed by the cash available. That's why you would see a larger percentage than is actually on the books today.
Makes sense. Thank you.
Okay. Representative Tanner.
Yes, thank you, and Mr. Rebbe, appreciate you being here. Just to speak briefly to Senator Blaylock's question, because that's been a frustrating thing that came a year before I came into the legislature. The JFAC made a decision to move that off budget. I have been working to try to get that back on budget. I do think it is good for the legislature to look at that as a whole, so hopefully we can actually get there at some point. But my question is, and I do appreciate the chart. I look at this every year. And I think it does give us a good kind of almost 30,000 foot view of kind of what is actually going on. I know this committee is more trying to get down to more probably about the 10,000 foot view. So the average aspect, I mean, you can have one position that gets, that somebody leaves and they hired about the exact same time and it looked like there was no actual change. So for me, it's actually looking at the positions that are actually unfilled for a portion of time and how long those positions are actually unfilled. So that's kind of the detailed information that I'm hoping we can actually, you could provide to this committee. And then as well as when we actually, the first press release went out for this committee, one of the things we actually stated was ending the COVID work from home policies. I know a lot of agencies are relatively nervous about that, their loss of personnel, people are not going to come back to the office. The other aspect of it is reverting positions that have gone unfilled. We did see within the executive order, the governor did at least take a portion of our recommendations of what we were trying to do here and at least get a portion of it, but he did mention that reverting those positions that are unfilled. So do you know if he is looking at ones that are unfilled over a 6-month, over a 12-month, or if there's going to be a randomized aspect? Have you actually seen anything from any of the budgets from any of the agencies actually coming to LSO at this point in time, or are they going to they're going to hold out and send them all to DFM, and then we're going to scramble again as usual September 1. So,
Mr. Bivey.
Mr. Chairman and Representative Tanner, my memory on the executive order was anything over 6 months. So anything that had been, any of the positions that have been longer than 6 months. We do plan to get that information, although I think it is more administrative, as I mentioned before, than really looking at the FTP cap. And so just, to your point, to kind of round out this discussion, and I don't think I did a very good job of completing that circle, and I apologize for that. But really what we're talking about is that percentage of filled FTP. The delta between that is really a long-term measurement of the workforce. So it's not just that point in time. It is that the Attorney General's office fills 95% of that 221 employees over a 5-year period. Another way to think about that is that you probably could reduce those FTP, those 8 FTP, that's the mathematical change, right? And that would meet what their current workforce level is. So that's why I think this report is a really useful tool for decision makers to kind of think their way through what an appreciable delta between appropriated FTP and what their workforce actually looks like over time versus the personnel appropriation spent on personnel. And so I think it does give you some additional tools that we really haven't had before this report was created.
Follow-up, Representative?
Yeah, just one last follow-up. I guess not a follow-up on that. I have another question more that I want to get out there. So one of the things that was in the governor's executive order was he talked about the III credit rating and through Fitch, just how important that actually is, and that we have a strong budget, strong economy, that the more recent one did come out with that. I know there is a lot of concerns within LUMA, especially within the Moody's report, that what they're looking at, that does affect our potential credit rating. and just not being able to actually audit. So I know we're looking at a lot of this stuff, but we're still not even able to fully get through an audit on a lot of aspects of our funding. So I know agencies are still struggling in the sense of what their FTP amount actually is and the dollar amount that's actually sitting there versus actually sitting in other accounts, and how much money is actually truly sitting there, if it's what's actually showing or is it not. So just curious if, because I mean, I am nervous about our AAA credit rating, and mostly not so much that I don't think that Idaho has a great reserve, has a strong economy. I think those things are all true. But I want to make sure that that when you have those numbers in front of you, that we actually have a solid, and those numbers are correct as we're looking through those budgets.
Mr. Bybee, any response?
Mr. Chairman and Representative Tanner, thank you. Yep, understood.
Thank you, Representative Tanner. It looks like Representative Scott has a question.
Thank you. My question is, can you explain the college numbers? Because they just don't make sense to me. The full-time employees, is that all of them? Is that all with the budget? Can you just get into a little bit more detail on that?
Mr. Bybee.
Mr. Chairman and Representative Scott, thank you for highlighting that for me. The legislature actually does not set a full-time equivalent position cap at the college universities. So we don't have the evidence of when those positions are vacant, because most of their payrolls are run on their own internal payroll. We have a measurement of what we think their full-time equivalent positions are at each of the institutions, but those are based on some historical numbers. My memory on that is that for instance, tenured professors, when this was created, were about 0.75 of an FTP when we started to really measure that. And so this is more for bookkeeping as a measurement tool. But again, we don't have their payroll data in order to crosswalk that between full-time equivalent positions and positions established. So that is a main limiter of our data set here. But we do know how much of their appropriation they are spending on personnel. And so those are the really important factors when measuring performance out of the institutions of higher education.
Do you have a follow-up, Representative?
Yeah, thank you. Quick follow-up. So you said we don't have their payroll data. Is that something that the state doesn't require them to send in, or why do we not have that?
Mr. Bybee.
Mr. Chairman and Representative Scott, and thank you. I was pretty inarticulate on that one. So they are required to send us their payroll data for when payroll has gone out. And so we track those reporting structure, but it is not an in-system payroll. It is an outside of the system, outside of LUMA and what used to be STARS. So that's why we know what those numbers are, but it's not a way that we can track and measure on an actual payroll date.
Thank you.
Thank you, Representative. Okay, I don't see any other questions. Mr. Bybee, thank you for the information. Appreciate you being here. Okay, next, Mr. Penny, if you could kind of give us a summary of what we're seeing on portal submissions and categories so far. And Mr. Penny, if you could also state your name for the record and go ahead and proceed.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the task force. For the record, my name is Alex Penny, and I'm a research analyst with the Impact Review Team and the Legislative Services Office. And I'm here to briefly speak about the public comment DOGE portal and the submissions that we've received so far. Waiting 1 second for the PowerPoint to come up. But Just as a refresher, the portal's on the legislature's website, and it provides a place for the public to report instances of government duplication, waste, or other inefficiencies. And it also allows citizens a chance to propose solutions to those problems that they've identified. I guess I can go into the general structure real quick. There we go. It should be live now. So the general structure of the portal on the website, it has an area for the member of the public to include their name and contact information, or they can submit it anonymously. There's an area for them to choose the relevant policy area that their comment deals with. Then they have the comment that is the purpose of their submission, and finally, any proposed solutions. So, over the past 4 weeks, we've received about 435 submissions to the portal. Here are the 11 relevant policy areas that the member of the public can choose from. As you can see at the top there, general government has 150 responses, and all the way down to the bottom, natural resources is the lowest at 7. So because the policy area doesn't always line up with what the comment states, we try to look at it one more way and do a couple other categories. So these are just 12 or so categories that we've developed at LSO. I do want to mention that this is an inherently subjective process, picking these categories and coding them, but we have tried our best. So just some of these comments are health and Medicaid. A lot of them dealt with skilled nursing, education with the Idaho Parental Choice Tax Credit, with personal opinion or no solution. That was just kind of comments that had general praise or displeasure with the legislature or elected officials, or maybe personal attacks. No real solution was identified. Just a couple other ones that I want to highlight. State operations were things kind of at the state level, so things like work from home policies or improvements to the purchasing process. While the specific agency and or personnel comment is kind of what it says, it deals with one agency or one employee or employer specifically. So just again, we've reviewed all 435 of these, just tried to take another look at them and categorize them in different ways. We're happy to look into any of the comments that the task force is interested and dig a little bit deeper into those and provide any analysis to the committee. But with that, that concludes my remarks regarding the public comment portal, and I'll stand for any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Penny. Just one question. We have the 435 submissions. Do we track if some of those are coming from the same person, so a particularly prolific commenter?
Mr. Chairman, yeah, that's certainly something we can track, and we do, and we've tried to code them as repeat, or if it is just a glitch in the system board. But if it is a separate comment, we can track that, yes.
Thank you. Questions for Mr. Penny? Senator Blaylock.
Thank you, Chairman. I just have a quick question. I noticed as I was reading through some of these, and I know you and your team have as well, it seemed like some of them, there were some concerns from maybe state employees, almost seemed like a whistleblowing, situation. I'm just curious if you guys pulled any of those out to investigate further. Maybe, they submitted it through this channel, but it maybe was more appropriate through somewhere else.
Mr. Penny.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, Senator, we've noticed those. I've tried to put them in the specific agency or personnel category. We haven't looked too deeply into them, but if that's the will of the task force, that's certainly something we can look into more.
Any other questions? Okay, thank you, Mr. Penny. Next item then is the Idaho Cleanup Act. You were going to give us a little review on that.
Okay, so for the record again, my name is Alex Penny. I'm a research analyst with the Impact Review Team and the Legislative Services Office. And this presentation will, I'm going to be speaking about the Idaho Code Cleanup Act, the portal that LSO has developed, kind of and the process that we've developed so far for the submissions that are coming into the portal. So for a brief overview, I have about just over 10 slides, and I'll take a little bit over 10 minutes of your time. For the structure, I'll first look into House Bill 14 and the Idaho Code Cleanup Act and what that entails. From there, I'll briefly get into the portal that we've developed and the information that we've received through it and will receive through it in the future. From there, I'll describe our plan and process for providing the provisions of code that we receive from the agencies to this task force. And then finally, I'll have a actual submission from the State Treasurer's Office, and we can go through that process. Okay, so getting into House Bill 14, the Idaho Code Cleanup Act, it was passed by the legislature last session, and it created Title 67, Chapter 37 of Idaho Code. And it, so all state agencies that were provided in that handout by my colleague at the last DOGE meeting are required to review their enabling statutes, associated code sections, and any code sections that they enforce for obsolete, outdated, and or unnecessary provisions. So obsolete is defined as meaning expired, unused, void, unenforceable, or not enforced. Outdated means no longer applicable or pertinent, duplicative with other portions of code, or superseded by other laws. And unnecessary means that public health, safety, and welfare is not served by the portion of code. So, and then agencies are to report the code provisions that they have found to be obsolete, outdated, or unnecessary to the legislature for consideration of repeal through a portal developed by the Legislative Services Office. And they're to do that by September 1st. So the portal is now live. It is on the announcements section of the legislature's website. And this is just a screenshot of the first portion of the portal where we collect the agency information and the contact information from the agency. This next page shows really the meat and potatoes of the portal. So for every section of code that they submit to the portal, they have to complete this page. So I'll just break it down box by box. But this first box shows that they need to enter the code section citation and the title and chapter name. Then they indicate whether or not it is an entire section or just a portion of a section. So it could be a subsection or it could be just a couple words here and there. And we've asked them if it is a subsection or a couple words here and there to attach a PDF, just so we get that correct and make sure. And then finally, they indicate whether or not it's obsolete, outdated, or unnecessary. And they give us a couple of sentences or a paragraph explaining their reasoning. And we've also included a notes section as well. All right, so now we have all that information coming in, and it's starting to come in now. It's coming in through Excel and different receipts and PDFs. What do we plan on doing with it? So the goal is to organize the submissions and the provisions of code that the agencies submit to us and provide them to the task force in a meaningful way. So every week we plan to provide a group of write-ups and a copy of the code section for the provisions that we have reviewed. And in the next couple of slides, I'll dig a bit deeper into how that looks, how we're organizing those provisions, and I'll talk about the handout that was also provided. Before I get into that, I want to mention if there are any specific provisions of code or specific subject matters that the task force is interested, we can certainly look at that, and we're happy to look at that. We envision this to be a fluid process. The task force can always ask the agencies or LSO any questions about the provisions that are submitted. The final goal really is to have the provisions of code that are found to be obsolete, outdated, or unnecessary drafted and referred to the relevant germane committees during the session. Okay, so getting a bit deeper into our sorting. So first it'll come through the portal, then it'll come to our team and LSO, and we're going to try to separate them into simple repeals, moderate repeals, or more complex repeals. And the goal really is to get the simple and the moderate repeals to the DOGE Task Force as quickly as possible, and to do our due diligence with the seemingly more complex or moderate repeals, whether that be speaking with the agency or with the other divisions within LSO. But I'll touch on that in our criteria a little bit more in a second. But then once we get those weekly write-ups and provisions of code to the committee, the DOGE Task Force will then be able to review that for however many weeks and to ask any questions to the agency, to LSO. The code provision could be removed from consideration for whatever reason, or it could be sent for drafting to eventually be sent to the germane committee during session. So I won't dig too deep into this slide, but this kind of is our criteria for when we're trying to separate those provisions of code that are coming in. So we plan to separate it again into simple, moderate, or complex. And a big portion of this will be using our in-house software to see how the code provision that the agency submitted is connected to other provisions of code. So the more times it's referenced in other areas, the more risky we think it is. And then the other thing that we'll be trying to do is look at the history and the legislative intent. We'll be trying to do a risk assessment as well, just to kind of get all the necessary background information and due diligence before we give it to the committee. Okay, so here is an example. If you look on your handout, the first sheet is kind of a write-up. It has what the agency has provided us. It has LSO's comments, and then there's a little section at the bottom for the DOGE committee decision. And the second page is just the code section itself. But again, I want to thank the state treasurer for finishing the report early and getting this to us. So it comes in through the portal. Here is the specific section. It's 671210B. And this deals with investing and securities lending. So our team has reviewed this. We've run it through the in-house software. And we haven't found this referenced in code anywhere else. We've looked at keywords like security lending and things like that. A portion of this code says that it should be terminated. The state treasurer's office has stated this was terminated in 2015. So we decided this was a simple repeal. We've created that little write-up. It would be the whole section. And then that goes as one of the provisions to the DOGE Task Force. And then again, from there, the task force could ask any further questions that come up. It could be removed from consideration, or it could go to be drafted to eventually be sent to the germane committee. Just one more example from the state treasurer's office. So this is what it would look like if it wasn't an entire section of code. So this comes in, and this section of code, 671221 Idaho code, it deals with having a reputable bank and fiscal agent as for the state of Idaho. And there are 4 mentions that the bank has to be in New York City. The state treasurer's office has elected to have this be considered for repeal. We're doing our review now. We're trying to figure out some of that legislative history and the intent. Why does it say New York City in the first place? Are there any other sections of code that say New York City? And we're trying to figure out that history right now. So that's our process right now. But we wanted to give you an example of just a partial repeal compared to when it would be a full entire section. But that concludes my remarks, and I'm happy to stand for any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Penny. Any questions? Representative Tanner.
Yes, thank you. I'm just curious, how many agencies have actually submitted through any potential changes to LSO?
Mr. Penny.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, Representative, so far we've got 3 responses. We expect a lot more next week.
Just follow up.
Go ahead.
Thank you. I had heard that the governor had asked them to send it to DFN instead of LSO. I'm not sure if that's actual or not. That's why I was more curious on the numbers. But do you know how many of do you know if you've heard of any that have come directly to DFM for any changes versus actually coming to you?
Mr. Penny.
Mr. Chairman, Representative, I know DFM has been working on this, but all the agencies are required to submit it to LSO by September 1st, so it should be coming through us as well.
Thanks, Representative. Co-Chair Ehlers.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Penny, follow up to that with the September 1st deadline. We'll be having another DOGE committee meeting a few weeks after that. What's your timeline there for getting through those and then being able to present those to our committee?
Mr. Penny. Yeah. Mr. Chairman, Mr. Co-Chair, a big portion of it, I think, is just assessing the volume that comes through as we get there. And we'll be happy to work with the task force. And we're really going to try to prioritize it with those more simple repeals than the moderate and then the complex. But I think it's something, as those numbers start to get in, to come in, that we work with the task force, kind of develop that process. But we would like to submit a certain amount every week to the task force for review. That way, you guys can do your homework and any questions that come up.
Thank you, Mr. Penny. Okay, I don't see any other questions. Mr. Penny, thanks for all your work. Appreciate you. Okay, committee, we are on track, time-wise pretty much. Any committee discussion on what we've heard today? Any thoughts on next meeting? Items you'd like to see, or other comments? Representative Tanner. I see your hands on microphones, but no lights on.
I was waiting to see if anybody else wanted to go first because I feel like I talk too much. One of the things that I had actually mentioned to Mr. Bybee that we had actually kind of put out on our first one was looking at that the COVID policies that are pretty much still in place from that work from home aspect and what that actually looks like, bringing those positions back to these buildings that some of them are empty, some of them are only partially filled, and yet we're still paying a mass amount of money for gas, heat, and so we just want to make sure we're utilizing the space and make sure we're not wasting taxpayer money.
Okay, thank you, Representative. Any other comments? Oh, Representative Scott.
Thanks. I'm super concerned that our legislative team of Alex and Terry and the others are going to do such a good job reining in the executive branch that they're going to be hired away from us. So we want to do a good job to keep these guys happy. I'm really impressed with what I've seen today with the reports, and I appreciate all the work they're doing. It takes a good team behind us and to get the numbers and that. So I just want to say I appreciate their work.
Thank you, Representative. Certainly echo those thanks myself. Representative Manwaring.
Good morning. Thank you, co-chairs and co-chair Lakey. I just wanted to make a comment on some information that I want to make sure we're trying to gather, and that includes maybe going back to a comment that Representative Tanner made and even Senator Blaylock made on whistleblowing. I want to make sure we're encouraging state employees to be able to report inefficiencies or ways that they see we could take legislative action. And so I know maybe we're encouraging some of those comments to come through the agencies, but I want to make sure we're encouraging employees themselves to have a method to be able to get to the task force and report some things that they might do, like some other public comments. So I just want to raise that to the committee for discussion and make sure we're encouraging that, and that will go into some legislation that I'm also working on going into next session related to whistleblowing for state employees.
Thank you, Representative. I don't know, Mr. Penny or Mr. Tatro, any commentary in that regard? I mean, I know we have the opportunity for comment and the anonymous category should some employee be concerned, but any other thoughts there?
Mr. Chairman, I think just looking into those comments a little more deeply and discussing the findings with the task force is something we can do in the future, and yeah, we can prioritize this.
Okay. That sounds good. The other commentary that Representative Manwaring had was just making sure we get the word out to folks about the task force. So I don't know if there's extra effort for that, but that's something we'll think about. Any other commentary, Co-Chair?
Yeah, thank you, Senator Lakey. Just maybe my sort of closing remarks here after we're finishing up our second meeting. I think there's a lot of information we've gathered, and there's a lot to look at that I would like to dive a little deeper on, and hopefully in our next meeting or two we can do that. Particularly, I think with these submission deadlines coming up of September 1st, I think we'll have some more information. I'd like to dive deeper into these FTPs and vacant positions and really make some headway there. I have a lot of thoughts going around agency consolidation. I think we've got some we've identified. I think there's probably more out there, and I'd love to hear, have other committee members bring their ideas as well there in terms of agency consolidation. And then I think next, hopefully soon, we'll have some more on this Idaho Code Cleanup Act where we can clean things up there. So I'm seeing a lot of, and as well as DOPL and licensing boards. I was pretty stunned to see that many certificates and registrations and licenses out there in our state. And so I think there's a lot of opportunity as well for those. So in these next coming weeks, I'd love to maybe gather some ideas from the other committee members that we can really hone in on and start making progress on some of these areas.
Thank you, Co-Chair. I would certainly echo that. Appreciate the information that we received. As I mentioned before, I've taken a lot of effort to try to work on consolidation of boards and commissions and agencies and making sure we're not putting the nose of government in people's occupation unnecessarily. So I appreciate all that info. Look forward to that. I did see some comments in regard to for example, to the Medicaid expansion, and that's certainly something that I'm interested in. But I know we have another committee that's kind of running on that. Do we have any info on what the scope of their review is? Representative Tanner, are you on that committee?
Yes, Co-Chairman. I am on a lot of committees, but yes, that is another one I'm on.
Yeah, we have the same problem, not saying no at sometimes.
Yes, I believe that is a problem. A little bit. I mean, one of the things we are digging into is the continual aspect of what that actually looks like and how that's going to be implemented. Again, this is a multi-year. It'll take us quite a few years to even get the contracts, be able to actually get out, let alone actually get to implementing them. I think right now one of the big things the committee is focused on is making sure that the legislature does have some control, some actually say in who we actually hire to help put together the request for proposals. So currently we need to hire somebody that's actually going to help us kind of put together to make sure that it matches what Idaho needs in a sense for an MCO company to look at Idaho. Idaho is very unique comparatively to a lot of other states, so it'd be nice to just take a model of what somebody's already done and actually just reapply it here. But every state operates so differently that it has taken quite a bit of time to actually do. So I'm assuming that the legislature will have several recommendations, or the committee will have several recommendations back to the legislature on how we should go about doing that when we get back to this next session. Thank
you, Representative. Does that scope include consideration of repeal, partial repeal, those kind of aspects?
That is something that is being continually talked about. We did see a 4% provider rate cut that just came out the other day from Health and Welfare. But going into actually repeal, I think that is something that has been discussed multiple times within the committee, but for Medicaid expansion, but it is not something I don't think that you're going to see come out in a report. I think it is a continual discussion. I would imagine you'll still see legislation come forward to remove that in this next session, but I'm not sure if that's something that the committee at this point in time will tackle.
And if I'm sorry to keep pestering you with questions, Representative, then it sounds like that's not necessarily in the committee's lane. Do you feel like it would be appropriate for us to hear some information about that in this committee?
Yeah, I think jumping into that area would be good. Again, that is looking at it from a DOGE aspect. That is looking at it from a cut aspect. When you are talking about able-bodied working adults living off of a socialistic system, I think that who's paying the taxes on it versus who's actually receiving them, I think, is something that we should be looking at from a DOGE side of things. And even if we only end up doing it to give recommendations back to the other committee, I think it is worthwhile for us to actually do.
Thank you, Representative. Any other comments? Okay, I don't see any online. Our next committee meeting is September 29th. Am I right there? And it looks like we've got a 2 o'clock time frame on that one, so a little bit different, but just heads up for everybody. All right, we appreciate all the information, all the hard work that was put into and the information presented, and committee members appreciate your service. Please give things a look and let us know if you have additional items you'd like to see on the agenda. And with that, we are adjourned.